From Washington, D.C., I'm Allister D'Souza. This is your roundup of the week's biggest stories shaping the United States and beyond. Welcome to Washington Watch.
But as the President National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared. There were no sources, methods, locations, or war plans that were shared.
Calls for heads to roll after a massive security breach. A journalist was accidentally added to a signal messaging group in which the US Vice President, CIA Director, and other top brass discussed a military strike on Houthi rebels in Yemen. A lawsuit has been filed and a federal judge has ordered the chat logs to be preserved.
What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
Vehicles imported into the US will face 25% tariffs starting April 2nd. Same goes for auto parts made overseas. Car prices could rise by thousands of dollars. Elon Musk's Tesla could be least hit. The EV company's vehicles are made in the US and use fewer foreign-made parts than its rivals. In the latest tranche of job cuts, it's the Health Department now. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in his mission to make America healthy again, is reaching for the axe. A quarter of the department's workforce, or 10,000 staff, will be laid off. The announcement coming as the U.S. battles its worst measles outbreak in years. President Trump has issued an executive order that targets another prominent law firm. It's now the fifth time Trump has taken aim at law practices seen to have links to his adversaries. This time, the proclamation cites D.C. law firm WilmerHale, which has ties to Robert Mueller, who investigated alleged Russian meddling in Trump's 2016 campaign. And in Massachusetts, a Tufts University student has been detained by immigration officials for allegedly being a Hamas supporter. The 30-year-old Fulbright scholar from Turkey was seen being forced away. Meanwhile, a rally took place at Georgetown University in D.C. for an Indian national, Badr Khan Suri, detained by the Trump administration for similar reasons. To the week's biggest story, a secret chat group that's no longer secret. A watchdog group is suing high-ranking Trump officials, and in a twist, the judge who has landed the case was only recently under attack by Trump's MAGA base. But first, what exactly happened? It all started off when the top editor at The Atlantic was added to a Signal chat group by mistake, where top Trump officials were discussing U.S. plans to bomb Houthi rebels in Yemen. The chat group contained U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and others. Now, in the chat, plans for the strike were debated and revealed. For instance, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth disclosed the exact time that American fighter jets would take off for strikes against the Houthi rebels or fighters. Information like this is shared on secure government channels by the Pentagon, not a commercial encrypted app like Signal. Now, the White House insists the information shared was not classified. The Atlantic editor waited for the strike to be complete before revealing the breach. He only disclosed more of the chat logs after Trump officials insisted the exchange was not classified.
No, I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again.
Nobody's texting more plans. I know exactly what I'm doing, exactly what we're directing, and I'm really proud of what we accomplished, the successful missions that night and going forward.
If this story proves anything, it proves that Democrats and their propagandists in the mainstream media know how to fabricate, orchestrate, and disseminate a misinformation campaign quite well.
I'm now joined by Nick Harper, who's been tracking developments here in Washington, D.C. Nick, a few Republican lawmakers saying they would look into the breach, but largely many have rallied behind their colleagues. Where do things stand?
That's right, Allister. We haven't seen many Republicans put their heads above the parapet and said that things need to change, but there have been a few. We've seen some of them call it a mistake, others a screw-up. In particular, one of the very vocal critics has been Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina. He's calling for a thorough investigation, as is the senator from Alaska, Dan Sullivan. He's called it a mistake. He's also said that the US national security team needs to up their game. Now, there is an effort underway, a bipartisan effort, both Democrats and Republicans involved, on the Senate Armed Services Committee to work with the administration and to ask the Defense Department for a detailed assessment of essentially what happened, how it happened, and what went wrong. They want answers on things like whether classified information was disclosed using a commercial unclassified messaging app. And they're also wanting answers on whether there was sharing of information with people, namely the journalist who was mistakenly added to this group, who don't have the necessary national security clearance. They also want to know whether this group violated the Espionage Act by disclosing operational details of those airstrikes before the attack took happen. The big problem, of course, being that the journalist was included, didn't have security clearance, and they want answers as to what went wrong. But it is interesting to note that many Republicans are rallying around the whole of the national security team. Very few of them coming forward to say that major changes need to take place.
Right. Nick, what's the mood like behind closed doors at the White House?
Yeah, it's a little difficult at the moment to read the mood. Donald Trump has suggested all of this is a witch hunt. He's even said that the messaging app could be defective, without evidence, of course. But he is resisting calls to fire many of the top officials who were involved in this mistake. We have seen some come forward, including many Democrats, saying that there needs to be someone to take responsibility, whether that is Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, or the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. They're saying that a person here needs to take responsibility, and they're calling on Donald Trump to axe some of the team. But so far, he's making it very clear that he's behind them. He's saying that there were not major mistakes involved in all of this, and really suggesting that he doesn't need to make any changes to his top team.
Nick, before we let you go, there's a lawsuit filed by an advocacy group. Tell us about that. And ironically, the case has landed up with the very judge who is already in the eye of a storm for other reasons.
Yeah, that's right, Allister. Let's deal with the lawsuit first. And this has been brought by a left-leaning transparency group called the American Oversight. They're demanding clarification about whether, essentially, the officials violated the Federal Records Act because they used Signal, where messages can be automatically deleted within the app. Now, the Federal Records Act maintains that all of this communication must be preserved. And that is why a US district judge, Judge James Boasberg, has now ordered the Trump administration to preserve those messages. But ironically, like you mentioned, this is the same judge who's come under fire and has fought with the Trump administration over deportation flights. Last month, or rather earlier this month, the government sent about 260 migrants, some of them alleged gang members, to El Salvador. But the judge involved in all of this ordered the Trump administration to turn the plane around. Now, that didn't happen, and Donald Trump is lashing out now at Judge Boasberg, saying that he's grabbing all of the Trump cases for himself, even though that these cases are randomly assigned to the judges within the district court here in Washington, D.C.
Nick Harper, thank you very much indeed. Nick joining us there from Washington, D.C. To all the news now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested that the United Nations govern Ukraine temporarily in order to reach a peace settlement. The White House has dismissed the idea. The week also saw Russia and Ukraine holding separate talks with US officials in Saudi Arabia to hammer out a truce in the Black Sea. Ukraine agreed, but Russia then said it will only comply when sanctions are lifted on Russian banks, something the EU is likely to block. For more, we're now joined by former US Ambassador to NATO, Doug Lute. Ambassador Lute, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on Washington Watch. Ambassador Lute, President Putin now wants the UN governing Ukraine, at least temporarily, till elections are held in Ukraine. He pointed out to arrangements seen in East Timor and parts of the former Yugoslavia. Your thoughts?
Well, look, Ukraine is governed today by a sovereign, duly elected government, democratically elected government, and it's not in a position to be replaced by anybody, not by a proxy government sponsored by Russia or not by an international body. So the people of Ukraine have made a sovereign decision. And that has resulted in the democratically elected Zelensky government. So there's not a role for governance here by the United Nations in Ukraine.
What about talk that Zelensky is past his term?
Well, look, the Ukrainian constitution allows for martial law, which has been instituted by the parliament in Ukraine. And during martial law, according to the Ukrainian constitution, elections are suspended. So for now, during martial law, the constitution is being upheld. And by the way, Zelensky has something like 75% favorability ratings among the people in Ukraine. So this is not a matter. This is not a matter of who governs Ukraine. The Ukrainian people have spoken.
Now, 2 weeks ago, there was much excitement about the US and Ukraine proposing a 30-day ceasefire, but then Russia said, no, it's just about stopping those attacks on energy infrastructure. Now, this week, we heard about the Black Sea truce, but Russia put conditions there too. Russia clearly dragging its feet. What do you make of Russia's strategy here?
Well, I think Putin is playing for time. I mean, this is, we all have to remember where this began more than 3 years ago with an unprovoked Russian invasion of a sovereign neighbor, Ukraine. And now, 3 years later, as there's an attempt, at least an early attempt by the Trump administration to bring the parties into negotiation and perhaps leading to a settlement, there's a strange imbalance that's developed. So on the one hand, Ukraine and the United States agree on a comprehensive ceasefire. When that position is taken to Russia, Russia narrows that and places conditions on a ceasefire. So only in the air or only at sea, for example. And yet the imbalance is represented by concessions being considered for Russia. So Russia, the aggressor, and Russia, the impediment to an agreed ceasefire. So there's an imbalance, a disparity here that's beginning to become prominent in these talks.
Ambassador Lute, at some level, Putin surely knows that Trump's current warmth may change on a dime, really, here. So how much patience do you think US President Trump has with Putin?
Well, I'm concerned that patience is not a virtue in this current setting, in this current White House, and I think undoubtedly President Putin understands that. So if he is in fact playing for time, as he imposes roadblocks or uncertainties or impediments to agreement, the timeline will extend, and I think the White House will become impatient.
All right. In a recent interview, Steve Witkoff, Trump's special negotiator on Ukraine, when asked if Putin wants to overrun Europe, said 100% Putin doesn't want to. Witkoff certainly doesn't have his head in the sand, you can argue. So why is he saying this? Do you think he's pandering to Putin? What's happening here?
Well, look, Putin may not want to overrun Europe in conventional military terms. That is, with tank armies and air attacks and attacks at sea and so forth. But it is undoubtedly a Kremlin objective to divide Europe from Ukraine, to divide Europe internally, and to divide Europe from the United States. That is a long-standing Russian foreign policy objective. In fact, you might argue it's at the top priority for the Kremlin. So you don't need to do these divisions with military means if he can do it politically. And arguably, if you look at over the last couple of weeks, the divisions that have arisen within Europe and between Europe and Washington, you can argue that Putin's seeing some progress towards this objective.
Ambassador Lute, now Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife Usha Vance are in Greenland this weekend. Before Vance set off for his trip, President Trump has reiterated his stance that the U.S. is going to have Greenland. You've served in the U.S. Army as Lieutenant General. What would you make of Trump's repeated claim that Greenland is key to U.S. national security?
Well, this again is another sort of peculiar dimension of Trump foreign policy. I mean, first of all, to give the Trump administration credit, Greenland is an important geographic entity. Geographically, because it borders the Arctic, and Arctic sea lanes and so forth are increasingly important. Greenland's important because of the prominence of critical minerals that are potentially an economic asset in Greenland. Greenland sits astride the North Atlantic sea lanes. So look, there's no denying the strategic importance of Greenland, but there's also no denying that Greenland is sovereign territory, sovereign to the Greenlanders, and sovereign by way of constitution to the NATO ally, Denmark. So this is not a question of sovereignty this is a question of sovereignty being potentially denied if somehow strong arm tactics were applied to Greenland. And what's curious about this is that Greenland remains open today to increased support, increased military presence by the United States. There's a military base there now. Greenland remains open to that. Greenland remains open to increased economic ties. Indeed. So Trump can get much of what he wants if he just cooperates rather than antagonizes.
Doug Lute, thank you so very much for joining us here on Washington Watch. Doug Lute, former ambassador to NATO from the United States. In other news now, Americans looking to buy a new car need to be ready to spend a whole lot more, maybe a few $1,000s more. President Trump's latest tariff moves are set to hurt automakers across the board, but Tesla may be spared much pain because over half of its parts are sourced locally. Disha Bakshi reports.
Donald Trump's Make America Great Again pitch that vows to punish all those who have been ripping off Washington for decades had a brand new target this week: the global auto industry. Trump's announcement left world leaders furious, global automaker shares in a slump, and consumers rattled. Donald Trump has made it clear, in his mission to do the right thing for the country, no one else's interests can stand in the way.
So we don't talk. I've never talked to him. Elon's amazing. He's never asked me for a favor in business whatsoever. I'm actually a little surprised by it. I might do it, I might not do it. I do what's right, and he'd want me to do what's right. No, he's a patriot. He has never, these are big deals we're talking about. This is probably nothing like this. And I've never had Elon come and say, would you do me a favor with the mandate or the electric mandate or anything. He's never asked me for anything.
Yet, it seems Trump's latest move may have hit too close to home. Namely, his closest ally, Tesla chief Elon Musk. Despite his claims that Teslas are the most American-made cars, Musk revealed that Tesla will not be unscathed by Trump's latest move, with the tariff impact on Tesla likely to be significant. While the EV maker has large factories in the US, produces all the cars it sells and key EV components in-house, it depends on external suppliers for smaller parts in countries such as China, India, among others, leaving Tesla vulnerable to auto levies. Estimates suggest that Tesla is currently procuring auto parts worth anywhere between $1 to $2 billion from India, with the Tata Group reportedly becoming a global supplier for Musk's EV company. Yet Trump's latest move may give Tesla an edge over its major competitors, including South Korea's Hyundai Motor, Germany's Volkswagen, and even America's General Motors, who import foreign-made cars into the US. Though this might not necessarily be a good news for Musk. Tesla has been in trouble over the past few months, with falling stocks, tanking sales, amid a growing global boycott of Tesla and rising attacks against its showrooms. The big question that now remains: will Musk storm through the impact of these tariffs? Disha Bagchi for NDTV World.
This week has seen the Trump administration confirming that 10,000 workers at the health department will be laid off. They join tens of thousands of other federal employees who've lost jobs as part of the DOGE cuts. We spoke to two such workers, including an Indian immigrant from Gujarat, on what's it been like for them.
US Agency of International Development, the building there behind me now closed. The sign here for that building, USAID, painted over, someone there scribbling in protest. Thousands of workers at USAID have been fired. Elizabeth, we're outside what used to be the USAID building. We see a big black plastic over there. That used to be the sign.
Yeah, the sign actually used to be up there on the stone, and then there was our logo there in the window. This had been the main USAID building for many years.
How does it make you feel looking at that today?
Honestly, this had been the first time I had come back down here since I had ended my job. My job had been terminated, and it brings up a lot of emotions. I really thought that I would be working for USAID for many, many, many years. And this is just a very physical reminder that career dream is gone.
USAID has done a lot of work across the world. Can you tell us why someone, say, sitting in India should be concerned about what's happened here in Washington, D.C.?
Absolutely. So USAID was created in 1961, and since then has been helping countries all around the world. India, along with other countries, what I would be concerned about is people living with HIV/AIDS and also people with tuberculosis. Now, my fear is that when help is needed, and whether that is making sure that people living with HIV are getting the medications that they need, or in the worst case scenario, if there's a bad flood or a bad earthquake, that USAID, which was the agency that would respond on behalf of the US government, is not going to be there to save lives.
Elon Musk has called USAID a crazy waste of money. There are a lot of people that agree with him. What do you have to say to that?
It's been very hurtful to see how quickly both Elon Musk and President Trump have turned public sentiment against not only USAID, but all of my fellow colleagues across the federal government. We join these jobs and we join these departments and agencies because we truly want to do good, not only by US taxpayer dollars and US citizens, but really bringing our values around the world.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Elizabeth, for joining us. Hey, Allister here. I know you don't want your face shown and your name mentioned, so I'm going to call you Anjali. Anjali, I know you've lost your job at the IRS, the tax department here in the US. You worked in cybersecurity. How important a role was that?
It was very important because, cyber attacks can happen at any time. The cyber field is very important for the entire tax return department.
Anjali, do you worry about wealthy tax cheaters, that they could get away with evading taxes because there are fewer people at the IRS now?
It can be a bigger issue. Near future, it can be.
Anjali, how are you coping at home? How are things at home?
Yeah, so I have to pay loans for my house, and I have 4-year-old son. I live with my retired parents, so a lot of responsibility on me and my husband. But now for single income, it's going to be very hard for us.
Anjali, I know you're from Surat in Gujarat. Do you miss India even more right now?
Yeah, I miss a lot, especially now because the weather there. in I believe in a single salary of one household, we can survive in India.
Thanks, Anjali. Good luck with the job search.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C., Allister D'Souza, NDTV.
That's it for Washington Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza.